Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special of War of the Roses. I have with me Cheryl of Earth Alchemy, and
Hello.
tonight we're going to be talking to Nathan Wilson. He is a Gnostic priest in Australia. Hello, Nathan. How you doing?
Doing good. Thank you for having me, Jim, and welcome. And so, thank you for having me here, and many blessings. And thank you again. So we can begin however you guys like, and yeah.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do, I asked Nathan to come so we could talk about the sacred feminine in Gnosticism because I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of conflicting information about certain groups and sects and stuff. So I wanted to hear something positive about the sacred feminine in Gnosticism. So here we are.
Well, one person I could begin with would be Marcelina, and she was a Gnostic Christian, not just any Gnostic Christian. She was a leader of her own Gnostic Christian movement of a Carpocratian sect. She was either the lover of or the wife of Carpocrates, who was of the 1st and 2nd century. She preached equality of men and women. She preached of the divine femme. She was invited to Rome for Pope Ansidius's papacy to become Pope. Actual title would be then Bishop of Rome. So she was there as a grand witness, having authority. She was so popular. She also condemned pagan brothels, if you will, for using women as sex workers, liberating them, encouraging her followers to do the same. They would also have a tattoo or a mark to identify them in secret because they would be facing persecution because of Rome. It was a no-no. You couldn't go, obviously, freeing slaves or accepting women that were meant to be married to someone and offering them safe harbage. So, wonderful woman. She was a superstar. Total crush.
And so, what was her name again?
Marcelina.
Marcelina.
Okay. And she was of the 2nd century. So she's
okay.
very
And
interesting.
where was she at? Where was she at?
She was in Rome? She was in Rome, but before this, she was in Alexandria. So she was invited to Rome to even lead her own movement and to be grand witness to the Pope becoming Pope. But at that time was Bishop of Rome, and they stole the title Pope, which is something different. So I'm pretty sure it's the actual Pope belongs to the Greek Orthodox Church, so of Alexandria. So that's actual Pope, which is.
Would you say she was trained in Egypt then?
Yeah, most definitely. Egypt was a place of learning not just maths or science or art. It was medicine, not just medicine, but language. It was at that time a Greek-speaking nation. You also had Hebrew-speaking people there. You had Aramaic-speaking people there, and later on, the nation by the 7th century will become Aramaic instead of Greek. You also had the native Egyptian tongue, and then later on, you would have Coptic, which would be a trade language between Jews, Greeks, and Romans, even, and Arabs. But one person was almost made Pope or Bishop of Rome was Valentinus. He believed that all souls were originally feminine, and that the archons were masculine. The aeons were the perfect balance of the divine feminine and masculine. So, which is very interesting. And during the fall, souls would go through a split of the masculine and femme. So originally one, in a sense. So it's interesting. But Valentinus was different to some of the Valentinians because they had subgroups with their own different beliefs. And this was common within Gnosticism, Christianity as well. Judaism had many different subgroups and sects. But the idea was the reunification of the soul, to rejoin of the masculine and femme, to be in union, basically in image of God, which was beyond sex. So the aeons themselves were in perfect balance of unity, so of opposites.
No, that's
right.
And thus, women taking roles of leadership. This was especially so for early Christianity, even some Essene sects, such as the Therapeutae. Oh, sorry, I butchered that word. So they were of the, I think, 1st century BC era to, what's it called? 1st century AD, 3rd century, maybe they died out. Oh, no, about 2nd century, 1st century, they converted to Christianity, basically. But they had women as leaders as well. They had men as leaders as well. They lived in their own sacred building, if you will, or kind of like, yeah, building, which Christians would later interpret as a monastery, basically, which was where the word sort of come from, in a sense, from Philo of Alexandria, who was writing about them. So he made up that word monastery as a way of describing them. And then from that, Christians mistook that as them being the first monks. So these were an Essene sect that practiced baptism. They believed that mankind was created in the image of God, being both male and female, God being androgynous, being beyond sex of both masculine and feminine qualities. So that's pretty interesting. And they were located in Egypt.
Very interesting. It's very interesting because, like, even though the word soul is feminine, no matter Egyptian, Greek, or Hebrew, it's feminine. Psyche is feminine.
Yep, 100%. And we find this also with wisdom, in Hebrew being Chokmah and Sophia in Greek. So again, with the divine feminine of God.
So divine feminine and Gnosticism, Saturn, that's a big thing for the Gnostics, right? Is Saturn. Isn't the divine feminine as Saturn isn't that Binah, and that isn't that feminine?
Yeah, as well.
Yeah.
Or masculine as well in some cases as well.
Well,
or both even.
Right.
Which is really, really cool. But yeah, Gnostic Christians were definitely known for priestly qualities. What was that one, Javelle?
Probably depending on whichever tradition of the Kabbalah you would follow too. And I think that depends on maybe the color scales that they go on. I learned from the Queen scale with the Golden Dawn. But that was my cat jumping down from a rafter. So
I just had a bit of wind, and it was just opened and closed my door, so I just made sure it was fully shut. But one thing I want to mention too is one thing I'm a big fan of is Mary Magdalene being the funder of the Jesus movement. If we look at the original text, the nonsense of her having 7 demons, well, it's been mistranslated, obviously. It's daemon. And later on, Christian orthodoxy would demonize this, and where we get the word demon from. So this means she worships 7 gods, and that Jesus either cast them out, meaning that she got rid of these gods and she follows the movement of Jesus. I believe that she was his wife. One reason I believe that she was the wife of Jesus is because she goes to the tomb to touch his naked body to rub it with herbs. You're not allowed to touch a male's naked body unless you're married to him, especially if you're going to a family tomb. That screams out marriage to me. But if she was a priestess and she was worshipping 7 gods, being of the Canaanite pantheon, which is where she would have been, she would have been well known and well versed in medicine, and that explains her going to the tomb with herbs, which is not Jewish ceremony. They just wash it with water. She's going there with aloe vera. She's going there with anointing oil, which likely had cannabosum in it, cannabis. So that also matches up with the Greek text when they're waiting there. It states that she's waiting there for assistance. So she's there to assist him. So it's very interesting when you even look at that sort of stuff too. But in regards to the Christ, this is not Jesus' last name. It's a title. Many sing Mary also as a Christ. We had the Carpocratians. They're the inventors of the United Trinity, of being united, of the Mother, Father, Son, or the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, which to them was the monad, or God, Theos, or Theo, and Logos and Zoe being life, spiritual life, a spiritual life of God. So this is also a replication of Sophia. They would make, and they were the first to do so, they were the first to make portraits and sculptures or bust of Mary Magdalene, Mary the Mother, and Jesus, and they would worship them. So they would try to enact it in their own selves to become Christ-like for themselves, which was the goal of Gnostic Christianity, to be like Christ for yourself, to discover the divine spirit within you, to have the perfect balance of the masculine and femme, so be in union, and to return. So when Jesus states in the Gospel of Thomas, when the disciples state to Jesus, have Mary leave us, she's not worthy of life, and he states that I can make her male in the image of yous, in regards to her being both masculine and feminine when she's an angel. So angels being beyond sex, so being an image of God. So the soul, so the flesh is just a meat sack, basically, in Gnosticism or Gnostic tradition. But it's not always just a discarded piece of flesh. It has its purpose as well, depending on the version of Gnosticism you're looking at. It's meant to also be, in some sects, the union of mind, soul, and body. So, but not all had this approach. They also had the, say, Marcion, you had to sin to be saved. You had to sin to repent, or to change within is the proper term of repent, meaning to change within, to change your mind. So he would encourage his followers also to have sex, as sex was also seen as a means of worship. So we also had some that did orgies as well. Not all. A lot of them, some Gnostics were against it as well, only believing to have one pair, being in the image of God, the masculine and the femme. So depending on the sect, you know, it's like when you talk about, what's that group? I forgot the name. We were speaking about before, Javim.
The Ophites or the...
One, the Ophites, I think it is. Oh, actually.
Ophites or the Mithraics?
One of them mentions about Jesus drinking sperm. I don't know if it was Ophites. I don't know. One of the church documents wrote it, so I forgot the name of the group. So they were mentioned to have orgies and stuff, but I don't believe that because it's a church written account. So I think that is just propaganda. And that's regarding the text is Jesus basically drinks his own semen and states to Mary that we all must do this to have life. I still see this as a church propaganda sect because this particular movement of Gnostic Christians were, and I think it is Ophites, were seeking to be like Christ themselves. So it's a bit interesting to me. I see that more as, what's it called? An account for a lot of Satanist groups to use. And this was going on, say, in the 80s a lot. Some of them were going off, you know, releasing themselves from the bread, you know, because of, say, that text.
Right. Well, I mean, that's how they use sex magic, is you use the bodily fluids and functions. And and Marie, I think it's Marina Abramovic, is with her soul cooking ceremonies. She has expressed, you know, you use the blood, you use the semen, you use the urine, you use everything. So yes, there are people that use all those things within sex magic ceremonies. Absolutely.
Yeah. Was it the Ophites?
Well, they do have the mystery rites, or the Ulyssean, something like that.
I wasn't sure which the text that the church claimed it belonged to. It was either they claimed it belonged to the Ophites or Borborites. I don't think it might have been Borborites.
You're going to have to find it. You're going to have to find it and send it to us so we can clip it in with this video, or put it in or put it in the comments, because absolutely.
The other sect of that version too. So regarding the Ophites, you had different communities of those Ophites. It was the same with the Essenes. It's like Carpocratians. You had different insights. You had different groups. So Carpocrates also had a son. And during the time of Marcelina, he led his own movement separate to his mother or his stepmom. So, which is also interesting when you look at that sort of fact as well. So Simon Magus as well, I like to bring up. His wife, Helen, if she existed, I believe that she existed, but her name may not have been Helen. That may have been mythologized. And even Jesus was mythologized. There was a story of the historical man and the myth was meant to also be symbolic, to be taken. It was meant to serve you. So Helen was also said to be reincarnated as Sophia in the flesh, and even Helen of Troy. She was originally in a brothel against her will. So she was raised there as a sex worker. Simon Magus rescues this beautiful man. She later marries him, and not just marries him, she becomes second in charge of that movement. She rose through the ranks because of her intelligence, and she caught the eye of Simon Magus, who fell in love with her, who wanted to marry her. So he actually
So that is an amazing story as to the power and the union of opposites when they seek to lift each other up, right? They're not like, oh, you have to stay down below me because you're a woman. No. It's I lift you up, you lift me up. And that's that sacred union back and forth we talked about before the show, where I believe that is what it takes to make that sacred Merkaba. I swear. And that is what I think maybe Hillman was talking about, the sacred song. I think it's a vibration of bringing down a sacred spirit. Absolutely.
Well, it becomes a spirit of its own. When it's an equal partnership and there's equal yoke, it becomes a spirit of its own, the relationship itself. And that's what I think a lot of people miss in like society today, is like it's always against each other, but the relationship itself is an entity.
Mhm.
So
100%. But Simon Magus was also a big romantic. He believed that to return to the Puruma, to the highest heaven, to return to God, the soul had to seek its feminine counterpart, or if it was female, she had to seek her masculine counterpart. They would rejoin, and they would rejoin as one in the Puruma. So very much romantic. So he believed you had to actively seek out your feminine pair, like Jesus did with Mary Magdalene.
Right.
So both being Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Simon Magus was condemned by the Roman Church as worse than Satan because he rescued a woman from a brothel. They did not like this, so they were sexist. Another thing is the Catholic Church would run brothels later on in time too. They would have their orgies as well, so they wanted to turn people on Gnostics and not them. So that became allegiance with Rome. So, sorry, Javin, if you want to say something.
I'm just over here pom-pomming with your words. Yes, I'm with you. Yes.
Well, another thing I want to mention too, and this is also pretty important because Simon Magus' followers, and this is very important because even if Helen was a myth, the followers of Simon Magus believed this tradition, and they would run through brothels, rescuing women and children, offering them safe harborage, making orphanages, raising them up, and then giving them a choice. They could be a part of their movement or go off into the world, which is beautiful. And because of that, and because they were willing to die for this belief, in which they were being crucified and being killed as well, and all that sort of stuff, because of this, later on, you would also have Constantine convert to Christianity. So other Christians were doing it. It wasn't just Gnostics. It was also certain Jewish sects, Essene sects, and also Jewish Christians that were full on against this practice because they recognized the divine femme. So it wasn't just because of good nature, but it was also because of their belief of this. So because of these people, and because they died in the millions, and because they kept running amok in Rome, child rights were introduced into Rome by the 3rd century. So that's because of Gnostic Christians that child rights were first introduced into the world, and it was enforced by the 5th century. So it took a lot of deaths and a lot of conversion, if you want to put it that way as well, for that right to be enforced into the world, because it was common right a father could choose what you want to do with the child. If the child was sickly, or you had a girl and you wanted a son, you could leave that child out to die out in the wilderness, and Christians were known to rescue those children. But it wasn't just any Christians. The earliest Christians, these were Gnostic and Jewish Christians. So they were very different to other Jewish sects, where other Jewish people just disregarded child sacrifice. They might have frowned upon the practice of infanticide, but they weren't doing much about it. It was the Jewish Christians and Gnostic Christians that would do something about it, as they believed that God was merciful. They had the teachings of Jesus about innocence of children, so they would do so, trying to be like Christ and rescue kids, blah, blah, blah. You had the Jewish sect, they were more appeasing their war god. So there wasn't a big storm and people weren't persecuted anymore, So when people talk about storms, they're not talking about praying just for rain. Please, God, have the rain come. He's talking about don't flood this earth, or flood my enemies, cause storms on them. So this is a different type of storm god. The Romans talk about this God, Yahweh, being a war god. That's when they seen Jesus, they see him as a troublemaker, worshipping a war god, not realizing that there were different forms of Jewish sects. Some worship El, a loving, merciful God. Others worship Yahweh. Others worship a combination of Yahweh and El. Others had different variations of El. Some Els accepted sacrifices, other rejected sacrifices. You also had some that worshipping Yahweh alongside Baal and Asherah. Obviously, we have a temple in the 5th century BC era dedicated to Yahweh and his wife Asherah, and there was burnt cannabis there that the priest would inhale to receive visions from Yahweh and Asherah. So we had a lot of that in the ancient past. I also see Jesus using drugs as well for his healing. We look at the Greek word for healing. Sorry if I butchered the Greek word, therapeutic, whatever it is. That means to render medical service to treat them, to take care of them, but it can also mean to minister to them. It can mean to divinely heal someone. So it wasn't just the narcotic that was seen as healing someone. It wasn't so much the doctor, but it was seen as the divine properties of the said herb that had the divine properties of God within it, or the angel. So it was still the will of the gods or the will of God that healed you, or even the angels. So, all that was in regards.
Hands-on healing.
Yeah, as well. 100%. That definitely went down. Yeah. We also see the Cathar, a later medieval sect. They were carrying medicine and going around healing people. They would carry moldy bread because it would be like a type of penicillin, or which is interesting.
Right.
They were also
Right.
going to be rebels because they were teaching women how to paint. That was a no-no, especially of there were limits. If you were of nobility, you get away with certain things. You could learn how to read and write, but if you were of common stock, women weren't allowed to read and write, especially paint. That was seen as being influenced by the demons to make them intelligent.
Witchcraft.
And the Cathar were against this. Yeah, witchcraft. And the Cathar was strongly against this. They also called out the Pope. They were killed in the millions. So the man who
yes, they were.
Yes. So we actually now can admit that it was a genocide because the person that coined the term genocide admitted that the Cathar were genocided by the Roman Catholic Church. And they were known to preach equality of men and women and children, offer safe harbage to women as well, teaching them how to read and write. And they also had a form of euthanasia. So when someone was dying, they would have their last ritual rite, Spiritum Sanctum, I believe that's what they called it, and to which they would starve themselves. And the priest would also starve him or herself alongside the person that was dying. So to take on their suffering, praying for that person that they would no longer have to reincarnate to return to Paroma, which is very interesting and also hardcore because sometimes that priest or priestess died during that practice alongside that person. So if that happened, they would be returning to the Paroma together. The priest or priestess would be the guide. So, but that didn't always happen. Sometimes there was also in rare yeah. So that was beautiful that they would. And then here's another nasty thing: if the priest or priestess and the victim was caught, even though the victim in this case, if you want to, well, not saying victim, that's the wrong word. The person that was dying would have had cancer, so this couldn't just be placed on anyone. The person had to be absolutely suffering, seen as no hope of recovery. So on that term, if they were caught to ease that person's suffering, the Roman Catholic Church would then burn both of them as witchcraft, as witches, which is horrible. So the Roman Catholic Church has a lot to answer for, obviously, for their crimes against
like 300
humanity.
years.
Yeah, you know, which is hardcore. We even have, see, this stuff was going on for a long time. We have Pope Gregory, I think Gregory IV, whoever our calendar's named after. There's an account preserved in the Vatican that records about how it's more pure to have oral with a young boy than what it is with having sex with a woman. That's horrible. It's disgusting. And that's, I think, probably, let's say that's 4th, 5th century, something like that. That's a long time. That's still preserved in their bloody Vatican. Yuck. You know what I mean? So it's
well, there is a part with the Ophites in the Gnostics and the Remains by Charles King that talks about it is better to throw pearls before swine before allowing a woman into the mystery or something like that, allowing her into the knowledge, like this knowledge of their tradition. And they were the ones, the ones that had, they rejected women in their tradition.
Yeah, some. I said different forms as well. There's always different sects with every group. Like even Cathar, they had their own different subgroups as well. There were some that were getting together with Muslims, Jews, and Christians and trying to bring them together, and they were writing their own texts, basically with alchemy, which is really fascinating.
That really is.
So, yeah. But no, there's not a lot of information about that. That was in France. I believe that took place in Languedoc. So, which is...
No, the Languedoc. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think people fully realize how many different sects of like early Christians there were and cults, right?
Oh yeah.
And people don't realize it it's all cults. You look around, even in modern day, it's still just cults. I want to say, let me give a quick shout out to Justin Nomer. Thank you so much for that super sticker. Xander 420, thank you. I don't think I've ever seen you here. Thank you so much. Oh, and Purple Sticky 420. Look, we're sitting here, we're stoned as fuck, talking about Gnosis or Gnosticism, not Gnosis. No.
He's a plethora of information. I'm glad you got him on because he's got some good information.
Absolutely. I love him. He's brilliant.
Actually, I took down a couple more notes on some of the groups, which I should have done. I said I'm freestyling a lot of this. Another thing too, I could also mention in regarding to Christian orthodoxy, as I see them as Paulinians basically, and that term Paulinian is actually a Gnostic term because there were Paulinians that were Gnostics, and they were badass. They would fight, and they were one of the only Gnostic groups willing to go to war, and they were known to be warriors. They were called Jews, they were called Muslims, and they were called Christians because all these groups rejected them. They were Gnostic Christians. So, but long story short, they followed the teachings of Paul. Paul's writings have been edited. Only 7 are considered authentic. A lot of Paul's story is Simon Magus. Associates of Paul, I forgot the names. One of them was a Roman senator or whatever. Well, Simon Magus married that man and that woman that Paul was associated with. We have writings of Felpla, forgot how to pronounce that name, but she's a woman. She was basically Paul's right hand. And there was a gospel of her that was rejected by the Roman Catholic Church in their canon. So we have a Paul that's for women, and then we have a Sextus Paul. So Paul contradicts his story, and it's they've got Gnostic elements in some of Paul's writings, which have also been edited. And we know now that these texts were edited to discredit Gnostic Christianity, which is hilarious. And one big proof of this, and no one ever talks about this text, and I've uploaded it on my channel as well. I need to do it again so I can read it better because now I know about editing. I didn't know nothing about editing then. The Epistle of the Apostles, that is a Catholic-made forgery to make that text, which was once a Gnostic text, which is possibly one of the earliest texts we have, but it's lost because they burnt it. We don't know how old it is. It's purely estimated. So guess how old it is. We don't bloody know. So they made it anti-Gnostic. We still have it. They stopped using it because they want to hide the fact that they were killing Gnostics and stuff like that. So the original text was Gnostic, the Epistle of the Apostles. So it was the traditions of the apostles, and it was revolving around their mysteries and all that sort of stuff and the rites of the disciples. So they removed that and burnt it because they didn't want you to know that Gnostic Christianity is older than Catholicism, which is obviously so. Celsus, who was of the 2nd century, he was an opponent of Christianity. He writes of the Christian movements of his time, how they were dispersed, though they didn't agree with each other. They ultimately still got along, but there was some infighting in a sense. He does not use the word heresy. He does not use the word heretic, and he only mentions Gnostic Christians because Catholic didn't exist back then. It was still forming, still organizing. So very funny. Yep. Then you got St. Irenaeus, who came in the late 2nd century, who was also a heresy hunter, and because of that, dickhead, more heresy hunters took place, and there was so much wrong in the world because of that. He demanded there's only 4 gospels. So that before this, there were other gospels, obviously, and the Christians were all sharing them because there wasn't a canon. So he sort of declared that, and then later on you had the Council of Nicaea, which would make the canon basically in challenge of Marcion, who already made a Christian canon like 200 years before that. So pretty funny. And that's how we actually get the letters of Paul. So we only know of 10 letters, and Marcion had them, meaning that it's likely Marcion probably wrote those letters or copied from, very likely he just made them up. We don't know. Then after his death, we have in the late 2nd century, or maybe it's the 3rd century, we have, I think it's 12 epistles being mentioned, and then later on, a couple of years after that, we have 14 being mentioned. So there's no mentioning of any Paul's letters in the 1st century. So that's funny. And all these texts that we have, I also make replicas too. All the gospel replicas, like I make, as well, I don't have a charity. But what we have, like say Gospel of John, every single biblical text we have regarding the canon is of the 2nd century. If they were of the 1st century, we don't have those texts. They were copied. So what we have are all copies. Even the Gospel of Thomas we have is a copy. And that could possibly date to the 1st century. Likely that papyrus dates to the 2nd century. But it's the only text that we have that could possibly date to the historical Jesus. Everything else is 2nd century. So Paul's letters are also 2nd century. So that means they were written in 2nd century. And that these gospel accounts, if they were around, they were of the late 1st century, obviously changed and edited by the church. We don't have the originals. That's sus. We only have the copies. And the Bible that people read today is of the 4th and 5th century, with 5th and 5th century add-ins and 16th century add-ins as well. Even the Septuagint, though of the 4th century, you find certain texts because it's missing. We have some added in later that come from the 16th century. So It's kind of dodgy.
So
Even
what
the
do you know?
Bible,
What come first? Who was the original Septuagint written in Greek or Hebrew? Do you know?
Septuagint was written, like the Septuagint itself is in Greek, but copied from
Right.
Hebrew and Aramaic and some Greek text. So that's pretty interesting as
Okay.
well. So that was ordered
Yeah.
to be compiled by Ptolemy because the Jewish people also were arguing over that time over what texts were authentic, whose God was right. You had all these different sects. Ptolemy wanted to put a Torah, basically, or a Jewish Bible, if you will, in the Greek library, the Library of Alexander, also for his own studying, because the Greeks wanted to know about what was going on with the world. And so basically they were arguing. He said, look, if you don't get your shit together and have this in translated for me to have a copy, I will do it myself. They panicked. They gathered all different rabbis from different tribes. And let's say, I think it might have been like 82 rabbis all up or something stupid. I've forgotten how many altogether were a part of this project. And they translated it into Greek. So that was the first complete Jewish Bible of that time. Before that, you had different sects. And not every Jew was down for that. Some of them pissed off into the wilderness and would write down their own text, which would be the forming of the Essenes as well. You also had the same with, what's it called, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you have these texts. So they're arguably written, some are written probably before the Septuagint and after. It's a combination. I think the Samaritan version is likely older because we see early depictions of El and Yahweh being replicated by a bull there. And that was found in Samaria. And they have their own Torah, which is separate. And funny enough, it's actually written more organized. So it's got less spelling mistakes in it compared to the Septuagint and all the Christian Bible. So it was written by someone with better literature. So someone was more learned, basically, that whoever compiled that, their version of the Torah. I would like to go through and study that. Once I'm done with the Septuagint and Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm going back comparing them while I'm translating the Gospel of Luke. And all the New Testament, by the way, the whole thing is full of spelling mistakes. It's bloody fucked. And there's a couple of mistranslated texts.
What you're telling me is you have a whole world that has based like a lot of faith and mysticism and power on maybe copies of older books and books that are full of misspelled words.
Yep.
Is that what you're telling me, Nathan?
Yes, that's what I'm telling you.
Well, I mean, this is why I'm like, throw anything at the wall to see what sticks at this point. So
that would also be regarding to a lot of the Gnostic texts too. So they also have alternative translations and can translate many ways. Say you got the text, one of my favorite sentences, and we only have the Coptic version of this particular sentence. I would love to see what they used in Greek, because if they used, say, Zoe for this word, it would change the whole thing. So the text is basically, and I love it, it's one of my favorite quotes, blessed is the man, meaning mankind, or person or human, the word that they used. So it doesn't just mean man. People mistake the word man, what it meant back then, as it meant mankind. So they're talking about males and females, gender inclusive. So let's just say, blessed is the person who has suffered and found life. That can translate to, blessed is the person who has suffered and found spirit or soul. So who has suffered and found their soul, who has found their inner spirit within, who is transformed, who has gone through the rebirth, connecting the masculine and femme.
The alchemical wedding.
Yes.
The bride of Christ.
And it seems like once you do that within, you're more apt to be able to go and find your other, right? Your partner.
Also, I want to go back on something too regarding Simon Magus, in regarding to him being the romantic, believing that the divine feminine masculine must reconnect. He believed that Yahweh was the demiurge, well, a fallen angel, so leader of the fallen angels. So very different in the sect. So in this tradition, if he was baptized by Philip and a student of Philip, it's likely that he learnt this tradition from the disciples. And this is so with Mary Magdalene and Jesus. Now, it's also likely that during the time of John the Baptist, or even during the same time of Jesus, Simon Magus was leading his own movement, as he was already known as great by the time of the disciples. So not just this, but Magus also referring to magic. So Jesus was also referred to as a Magus. He even states to the disciples, which one of you will be the lest and serves will be Magus. So even Simon Magus was also viewed as a Christ, or reincarnated as Christ, or achieving his inner Christ, depending on the sect that you're looking at.
Magus, Magus is like a magi, a magician, right?
Yeah, there's another one as well. And the Magi visited Jesus too. So we didn't just have one Jesus speaking to one diverse crowd of Jews, of just males and females. No, but he's speaking to a diverse audience of different religions. So Luke was a doctor and a Hellenistic Jew, and it's likely that his parents were either Greek, or they were Greek-speaking Jews, or they were Hellenistic Jews, being Greek philosophized. So basically having Greek philosophy adapted into their religion. So
it sounds like to me that Jesus was against like organized religion.
Yeah.
If we go outside of what the new and up and coming beliefs about Jesus is, right? That he was against organized religion, period.
Makes a lot of sense, because some of the Essene sects were too. Some completely disregarded the whole organization, rather believing for an individual path. So the individual monk path. But some Essenes were also celibate men, Yeah. And cult was all religious, well, like sort of a cult, basically, in a sense, like even you like a movie, it's a cult following, so it's just, we like to use the word religion or spirituality instead, it's whatever you make of it, in a sense, it's all just wordplay, everything has a meaning, everything has an alternative meaning, it's always two sides of the same coin, basically, and that's the same with, these beliefs. It was up for your own interpretation, and that's why when you read these texts, they have alternative translations, and a lot of the times they're put there on purpose because they're meant to mean all three things or all 10 things, so it's for the individual reader to find gnosis, to find their own spiritual path. What you receive might be different to what someone else receives within spiritually, and what works for you might not work for someone else. So it's always that individual path, which is Gnosticism was,
right. So this thought that goes around, especially here in the United States, that Gnostic beliefs are like a prison planet, where the archons and the demiurge. Do you feel that way with it?
Not really, no. There were Gnostics that did believe that, obviously. There were some that didn't, but I'm more the symbolic one. So there were a lot of and this is what I mean, the word archon also means politician, someone who rules over material, so material rulers. So some Gnostics just seen this, it was encoded in mystery because you couldn't speak about your rulers at the time. You were executed, you were killed for that. You spoke about a judge back then, that was pretty much a death sentence, especially you spoke about your emperor. You got caught graffitiing something, that was a death penalty. Your family could have been harmed too, So they were speaking of these politicians that were ruling over them. Yaldabaoth can also be the god that they worship, meaning that the actions they do in the name of this god, but it can also be your own ego, your lower self, your own ignorance, trying to rule over others, etc. So I'm big on that. So the symbolism within it all. So I think in regarding my Gnostic spirituality, or my faith, if you want to call it that as well, my own mindset would be for you to be like Christ, would be to escape this material mindset, basically, to return to your original spiritual nature and to ultimately stop reincarnating, return to Brahma, basically, return to energy. But I'm also fine with nothing at all after this, and this is your heaven now. So your own interpretations, I won't take that away from you. The only problems I have is the ones that follow the war gods and harm children or harm others for the sake of them thinking they're doing good, not realizing they're just falling in ditches, making this planet worse than what it should be. It's like some Gnostics love this earth, but they disliked the material world, worldly view of it. So they honored the earth being the divine femme, being Mother Earth. So also being in replication of Sophia. We had some Essenes that had the belief that Mother Earth was the, what was the words? an aspect of God or the feminine property or principle or something like that. I forgot. There's another word I'm looking for. A physical aspect. So of God, basically, which is interesting as well. That was also believed by some of the Ebonite sects. So they honored Mother Earth in their traditions, which is trippy. So I like that as well. So we had the belief that God was both male and female, created in God's image, soul. They also honored the Holy Spirit being feminine. They were Jewish Christians. So we had this belief of Sophia being within Gnostic Christianity and some Jewish sects. But even the role of Sophia would evolve over time as well, being originally just mentioned either as God's feminine counterpart, and then later on we would have a split and gone through a fall and all this sort of stuff. Not all Gnostics had this approach. Some Gnostics had a belief of two Sophias, a divine aspect that didn't fall and a lower counterpart that would fall. So take your pick.
So now let me ask you that the counterpart that would fall. Now is that the sacred feminine embodied in both men and women, engendered within them? Or,
yes. So that fall also represents the fall of man.
Okay. Now, was there a sect that viewed? Now there was sects that rejected women. Were there sects of women Gnostics that rejected men?
Most definitely.
Okay. What sects were those?
I would say possibly some Sibylist.
Okay.
But now with this whole thing, it's still speculation. So for me to say I know 100%, I'll be talking shit. Okay. So that I will not do.
Okay.
Some carpocrations possibly too. So it's hard to say. It's all speculation. So that's a lot of this. Even the Bible itself, all of it is speculation. And even regarding the practice of saving children is still mostly speculation because we're relying on someone else's hearsay on writings. Though we have writings, written accounts of it, they're still just written accounts. It's like the Bible itself. We have eyewitness, they're written accounts. But if we have the Gospel of Luke, for instance, it talks about many have tried to write these accounts and they have been unsuccessful, meaning that others have tried, blah, blah, blah. So there are other versions of this Gospel. And there's always the same. So most definitely, we even had some Gnostic Christians that wanted women in charge. So kind of a form of communism in a sense. For the people, so the money would be dispersed, the women would choose because they believed that men were too reckless. And this was in some beliefs of some Valentinians and some Cephian Gnostics, which again you had different sects of Cephians and different sects of Valentinians, and cross between somewhat hard to tell were they Cephian or were they Valentinian or they their own group, which people don't really ever mention that last part, their own group part. So that's again
right.
So carpocrations, you had ones led by Marcelina, a woman. At the same time, you had one led by the son of Carpocrates and possibly the son of Marcelina. So it's a toss-up. And he was a bit more male-dominated compared to, say, Marcelina's version and Carpocrates. He had a different view to his father. You also had I believe it was either Carpocrates or Symagus, that they had a son. And that when he died early, I think it was Carpocrates, or it might have been Celsius. I've forgotten now. But one of them had a son, and when he died early, young, he deified him. I think it was Carpocrates. So he deified one of his sons that died early on, believing that he would become the angel in heaven and rejoined as the divine feminine masculine, becoming Christ as well. So that was very interesting. So he was starting his own cult around that. So I believe it was Carpocrates as well. So I have to relook that one up, and I've mentioned it somewhere. So, but yeah, same thing when you study.
So you
forget.
Look it up. Did you have something, Cheryl? Were you about to say something?
No, I just think it's really interesting. That's why I'm quiet, because I'm listening, because he's got a lot of good information.
Absolutely. Thank you, Clary and Banshee Girl, for showing up. Good to see you.
See what else I could bring up as well.
You mentioned the Sibyls, right? So the Christian Sibyls, and that's who is on our wallpaper behind us is an art piece, several art pieces of the Christian Sibyls. And we talked about how they it's very interesting if you go back and look at them. They're depicted with all this symbology that is normally seen with like Christ. You have one that carries a banner, one carries a cross, one carries a sword, and then the thorns. And I'm thinking, did the thorns, replace the ivy? And some people say the
Well, I
thorns
think the
represent
thorns, if you look at it in
sun.
Greek, thorny has a meaning as well, and it's associated with the Asherah tree. So the Asherah plant, so being thorny, so a thorny tree, which was also
Mhm.
seen as the tree of life within the ancient Egyptians, and that would produce DMT. So I see that as
Right?
another
Yeah.
cult symbolism in that, with a crown of thorns as well. But it could just be a crown of thorns, but the text being thorny implies from the acacia tree. So that's pretty cool.
Right. Now, this one thing that absolutely made sense to me that I learned while in the cult was how they would use thorns and to prick the skin as like a drug injection. They would just like dip the thorn and then prick their skin. So and then you hear about Jimi Hendrix, who like cut his forehead and put some coke on the bandana, and wore it like that.
Never
Yeah,
heard that before.
you
Oh,
haven't?
cool.
I have it a
No.
long time ago. And that was like the slow intake of the coke throughout, the dun 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 dun. So yeah. I've wondered that if Jesus did dip the crown before he put it on his head, or if it was dipped. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's possible that the Romans did it too as a form of suffering too, to mock his culture as well. So I see that more as an insult as well. Also because a lot of crucified victims were stripped naked and strung upon the cross naked. It was to full insult you, especially Jesus being Jewish. It was a sin for men to stare at other naked men too. So it's full on a mockery of the culture and customs. So say the shroud is real. Like most scholars think it's a forgery. It's got good accounts in both ways. It's possible that that shroud, and this is not very much discussed either, is actually a copy of the original, which is also a good case as well. Long story short, it depicts a naked Jesus, which matches up historically. So whoever was made it, or if it's authentic, matches up pretty good authentically in that sort of case. So even the rebels previous slaves that rebelled for their freedom, Spartacus, they were all strung up naked. Well, they never found Spartacus' body, but those who rebelled that were captured by the Romans, they strung them up in a long line of crosses all naked. So Jesus would have been strung up naked as well. They talk about gambling for his clothes. One text states that they left his little loincloth or whatever behind. Other texts imply everything's been taken off. So when they give him a drink as well, he screams out like basically, well, he rejects a drink. That drink is meant to be mixed in with a wine or neos or a potion, but it's mixed with myrrh. So myrrh was also an ingredient, not all the time, was used in sex drugs in the ancient past. It was also used in ancient anointing rites too, rebirth ceremonies. It wasn't just used for sex. It was used for many different cases. It was also used as medicine, perfume to cleanse the body, la la la. So they tried to give him this to give Jesus an erection. So to mock him. So the Romans were pretty cruel, and these weren't the only people apparently that they did it to. They possibly did it to other crucified victims too, just to shit and gigs at them. So Romans could be cruel as well, to let them suffer for days, weeks. So Jesus' account would be the shortest crucifixion account we have, which is kind of odd and strange because we have accounts of people taking 2 weeks to die. So there was
wow. So the Romans.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but I'm like, this is new. So the Romans really they got off on torture, right? Is that
sometimes,
what it sounds like? Yeah,
because
fucking Romans got off on torture.
That was also, I would see it more as fear, to imply fear on the person. This is what happens if you mess with us. So like with the mobsters, basically. So I see that more as that. But yeah,
like a poster child.
Yeah, but yeah, mostly to induce suffering.
People.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
So they're going to be mocking him. That's one reason you see him reject the drink. So if he was raised in, say, traditions of the temple, his mother certainly was. She was a temple virgin. So she would have been a priestess or an oracle in her own right, receiving visions, telling prophecies. I'm giving birth to this child, blah, blah, blah. So we see this case of, again, with him rejecting the drink, making sense that he was raised into this tradition, so he would have known the effect of this drug. So realize what the Romans are trying to do for it. But then later he calls out, I'm thirsty. They give him another drink, which is a reference to a potion. So they're likely trying to heal him, so to keep him alive or knock him out. And this is why you have Mary waiting there for assistance. And then they place him in the tomb and she goes there to rub his naked body with herbs. So it's likely they're trying to save him. And regarding to the body, the text can translate to living body or carcass or dead body, but it can translate to living body, which is very important to mean that he was possibly still alive. There were Christians that believed that Jesus didn't die on the cross, that he survived, which is cool. Some call that now the swoon theory. Others didn't have this opinion. Others believe that he did die, but his soul was lifted up and become the Logos and replaced Moses as the Logos, or was just made his begotten son and deified. And it was the spirit as a Logos that came before the disciples, and that was the resurrection. So if you go to the Gospel of Mark, the ending part of chapter 16 from point 9 to 21, I believe it is, were added in the 5th century. So, and some 4th. So 4th and 5th century add-ins. So that's interesting. So you only have Mary appearing in a tomb and that's it. And it's missing or whatever, but nothing else. There's no form of resurrection, just the body's missing. That's it. It ends. So you have other accounts of Gospels who that contradict as well. So you can't really rely on these Gospel accounts either. So the first resurrection stories come from the Gnostics. And this is why they were edited in the 4th and 5th century to take out the Gnostic elements of rebirth and resurrection. So the disciples, so the Gnostic text mentioned Jesus staying with the disciples for 10 years before disappearing. So that's possible that he was there for 10 years and died from his wounds. They survived as well. That can be taken as that, or he ascended. So it's hard to say. It depends on that interpretation. We don't know the author. We haven't got a time travel device yet, so we can't go back and ask them. And that's on every single text we have in most cases, unless we have some sort of evidence for it, say depicted in ancient artwork. Say we have the healing of Lazarus, for instance. We know that ancient Christians did have this belief because we find it in very early artwork. Some of the first depictions of Jesus, we have Jesus with no beard healing Lazarus. So we know that translation is meant to be taken like that, for instance. But other texts, we don't really know how the translation is meant to be taken. So that's interesting. And even regarding to Lazarus, that can be implied his living body still. So meaning that this resurrection is symbolic for being reborn mentally and spiritually.
Thank you so much, Purple Sticky, once again for that super chat. Thank you very, very much. This is the first live where we have had super chats, and it's turned out quite nice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you if you've seen where, like, Hillman was coining on Jesus with the donkey head, like that depiction, that artwork depiction. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I haven't seen it, but I would know what he's getting with. I think I have maybe, but the donkey head thing, he was just going to Egyptian sources now. But the thing is, we have early pictures as well of Gnostic Christians alongside Egyptians, and they would call these Coptic Christians, even Gnostic Coptic Christians, so Coptic-speaking Gnostic Christians. Now, the Egyptians seeing these guys as a continue-on of their religion. So then talk about the story of the Song of the Pearl, taken out from Egypt, stolen from foreigners, meaning that the Gnostics give it back. These other ones are stealing and not giving them credit. So that's one reason the Egyptians like them.
I don't know this story at all. I need it. Yeah, I need the story.
Interesting. The Song of the Pearl is actually very likely to be possibly one of the oral traditions told by Jesus. So meaning that Jesus likely grew up in the mystery cults in Egypt and was giving back due credit or something. So it can be taken as that too. Some believe that Jesus was Hermes reincarnated, and Thoth as well, which was some Egyptians believed too, which was not uncommon for the ancient past. There were many times that ancient groups would recognize another deity as their deity. Okay, cool. You got Zeus. We got El. El is Zeus, you know, for instance, like that. Or some Greeks even believed that Yahweh was Zeus, and some Jews believed that Zeus was Yahweh, though that would be viewed as heretical now. But there were some Jews that believed this, thus Hellenistic Jews. So you had all different types of Jews. Even John of Jesus,
You know what?
Tons.
I'm just seeing all these ancient people with these God name tags and just swapping name tags with different people. Like, well, my God said I can do this, but your God said you can't do that. You want my God? Sure. Okay, I'll take your God. You see?
Yeah.
You see?
Like magic cards.
Don't send nobody to the wall with no judgments. Nobody ever, never. You know?
I'll give you a couple of names on some groups. These are all just Jewish sects, and they were at the time of Jesus during his lifetime. And some of these will be before, obviously. So Second Temple period Judaism. So you had the Essenes, all different sects of Essenes. You had the Therapeutae, which some call Essenes. Margarites, either they're kind of an Essene sect, but they are before the Essene sect, so they're likely the ancestors of the Essenes, and they were Gnostic Jews. So they believed that Yahweh was a demiurge, basically, and that El was the true supreme God. Then you also had the Sadducees, Pharisees, Zealot Jews, different communities of Zealots, such as you had the Caesarea ones. You had the Samaritan Jews, different types of Samaritan Jews. You also had Syriac-speaking Jews, Hellenistic Jews, different types of Hellenistic Jews as well. Then you had Canaanite Jews, which is kind of not really a popular term, meaning that these were Jewish people with Canaanite ancestry who spoke the Canaanite language. Being Hebrew is a Canaanite language either way, so it's the last surviving Canaanite language. So Simon, who followed Jesus, was a Canaanite. So this is what people don't take on within Christianity. They don't know what it means when you say that there's different sects of Judaism. They just have it over their head. You say that there's different forms of Christianity. Oh, they're all wrong. We got the right one. Well, then apply that to Judaism, dickheads. You know, like it's so, they don't know what they're doing. It's because they're so mentally mind blocked that modern Christianity, Islam especially, caused a mental retardation on the world of science and art and religion itself, which is horrible. And I have a lot to say about Islam as well. They caused a lot of damage towards women as well, especially they would have a role to play with this as well. Like America's first war as a united nation was against Muslim pirates that came there to raid America for white women. They also raided Ireland for white women. So interesting enough, they would also use the Pirate River, which was basically would go out to sea throughout the Jordan or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And they would use this to kidnap women. The Canaanites used this same bloody river to abduct women. So you go to Genesis 14.13, you have in the Septuagint Abraham, the Pirate being traveler as well, being referenced to this river of piracy. So meaning that whoever wrote that text was in regards to the Canaanite ancestry going through raiding women. And that's why you continue that text, you see Abraham taking not just his nephew back from whoever raided them, but their women. So that would go back to the Shashu of Yahweh, being in ancient Egypt, worshipping Yahweh, their war god. Some did worship El. They were recorded by the Egyptians as bandits, brigands, mercenaries, people who were known to kidnap. So traffickers, basically. They were pirates. They were wandering nomads that lived in tents and just went around stealing other people's shit. Then you had the Hyksos, much more civilized version of the Canaanite tribes. They usurped the Egyptian throne and ruled Egypt for like 100, 200 years. They worshipped their god El. Some did worship Yahweh, though. But their main god was El Elyon, the head of the Canaanite pantheon. And we have the writings of Josephus of the 1st century. He was a Jewish man. He states that the Hyksos were the founders of Jerusalem. That's interesting. And he's Jewish. Yeah. I take that as a big count. Although some of his writings being messed with by Christians because of his writings of Jesus and stuff. We don't know what he said about Jesus. I don't quite think that he just said he was a wise man and something. I think he had a bit more to say. Like, it's hard to say. I think maybe he might have liked him, but it's hard to say. He might not have as well, because he didn't like many of the people claiming to be messiahs, because not all Jewish people accepted Messiah. The Sadducees, for instance, did not believe in Messiah. They did not believe in an afterlife. They believed once you were dead, you were dead. God was totally unknowable, beyond this world. So perfect.
I was raised in a church. It was more like a cult growing up, and it was Armstrongian, which had a lot of the Old Testament Jewish beliefs. We went to church on Saturdays. We didn't celebrate Christmas. We didn't eat pork. We didn't celebrate Easter or anything like that either. So it's like it was a weird little cult, but they called themselves, non-denomination, Worldwide Church of God, so.
They also did their fair share of burnings of non-denominational Christians, Protestants as well. But I'll be back quickly. I just want to go to the toilet quickly. Back in 2 seconds. If that's okay with you.
Yeah.
I'm back
Go
shortly.
ahead. Absolutely, everyone. I hope you're enjoying Nathan and this discussion. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Yeah.
You do not have to send super chats. Super chats is just your way of showing appreciation if you want to.
And we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Purple Stickies. Let's see. Purple Sticky and Just a Knower. Let's just show them up again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Xander, for
Thank you.
See, these cannabis guys are phenomenal.
Those are your cannabis guys? Well, I need to hang out because I need to smoke.
They're legit, girl. They're legit,
Well, that's cool. You seem like you're having fun with it.
Yeah.
Hello.
Love is my
Well done on bringing
religion.
non-denominational, by the way, Cheryl.
What was that?
Well done on bringing up the non-denominational Christians as well. Because I got a couple of things to say. Because they also they were known for the witch huntings as well that went on alongside the Protestants. But these words like that they're using, like Catholic, universal, non-denominational Christians, well, they're kind of basically describing Gnosticism, basically, because they were the universalist out of Christians trying to harmonize other groups that were killed and persecuted. No Gnostic Christian has ever gone around persecuting others and killing others or harmed any child or harmed any women. So that's something that the Catholic Church have all trophies of, and the Orthodox movements. So it's kind of messed up when you look at that sort of history, what they have to answer for. But the Gnostic Christians didn't belong to really any organization so much. You had groups that had their own subgroups, obviously, but you had freelancers that didn't belong to any group. They just called themselves good Christians or Christians in the know, Christians seeking spiritual gnosis, or just Christanos, being little anointed ones. So one's trying to be like Christ, which is the term Christian, where it comes from. So they don't realize what they're doing. These modern Christians, even the term to build a personal spiritual relationship with God, this is Gnostic. So in a sense, modern Christianity is a hijacking of Gnostic Christianity, which is hilarious. But the Son of God, in Hebrew, this is what Christians don't understand, why language is important. The meaning of this means a human being, just like me and you, just a normal human being with a personal spiritual relationship with God. That's all it means. So that's when you're a child of God and you are a son or daughter of God because you are in alignment to God. You're enacting God's will. You're in harmony with God and yourself. The opposites in union, again, masculine and femme. In Greek, theostotheo, or, sorry, I butchered the word, meaning son of God, meaning to be adopted by God. Someone who has been reborn and adopted by God. So, or has been deified after death. There are many sons of God. And Alexander the Great, people would also pray to him, have little sculptures and talk about their problems to him. Alexander, help me for my washing today, just for instance, So it went on. People had no doubt silly prayers back then as well, so it did happen. But yeah, it's important. Language is important. Even the word daemon was regarding to your inner soul. So they just demonized the soul. They demonized their higher self. They demonized Jesus because Jesus was also seen as a daemon. Daemon was also seen as God, as a spirit, a guiding spirit, as this is what it means in Hebrew as well, a guiding spirit. So they could also be unclean spirits too. So an unclean spirit was someone who rebelled against God, that died and was still angry with God, or it could be just an evil piece of poo that.
Well, I've got a question about the paganism and the Gnostics. How does that mix? How does that work?
The honest truth, pagan is such a crappy term. We're all pagan, really.
It is, but it's such a easy term for, especially like just
It
to
is.
talk about
I like
not
the term
Abrahamic
too.
religion.
Yeah, I
What
like
was
the
that?
term in the sense. I like the term in the modern sense, but
Right,
not
right,
in the
right.
Catholic sense. You know, I don't
No,
like how
not the
Catholics demonize shit. They're fuckheads. I like pagans
right.
because they're honest people. You know, they're cool. Well, you two girls, you're
Well,
wonderful.
not all of them.
Well,
Not
no, not
all
all
of
of
them.
them. But,
There's
but
No,
I
bad
think
no,
that's
apples
because
in every cart.
everyone. Oh yeah, there's bad apples and Gnosticism too. I'm not going to mention any names
Oh
on that
yeah,
zone, but there are some.
yeah.
I've
Every
met
corner.
some places.
Yep,
So you know,
yep,
not everyone's
indeed.
peace and loving, and that was even back in these sects of say early Catholicism. Not all Catholics went around burning the Cathar, for instance. We had some Catholics that challenged the Pope and that fought to defend the Gnostic Christians. So that crusade that was launched, there were Catholics fighting for the Cathar. Some Cathar, though, did choose to fight, though very, very small in number. Most of them walked into the flames, choosing just to die than being converted. It wasn't just as simple as that. It's not because they didn't want to change their religion. It's because they seen their family members being burnt before that, sexually assaulted, abused, and killed, and being torn naked, stripped, and exiled from their houses if they were allowed to leave, which did happen. Not all of them were just burned. Some of them were stripped naked, bashed, and thrown out of their houses, and land taken from them, made homeless because of their beliefs, which is messed up. So you had the Paulsinians. They didn't want this to happen to them, so they fought. And the Muslims say, these guys aren't Muslim. The Christians will say these guys aren't Christian, and the Jews would say these guys aren't Jews because they didn't know what the hell to make of them. They were badass warriors. They were mixing in the traditions of all these groups. They were more male dominated, so they weren't like your typical Gnostic Christian. As I said, I don't know any other Gnostic Christian group that was willing to go to war and kill people. So this was the only sect that was. And they had their own writings as well. They were pretty much destroyed from what I know. They pretty much converted into either Islam or Judaism or Christianity, mostly to Islam, like fourth conversion. So interesting that they would still, because they would fight for the Muslims to fight against the Crusaders, and sometimes they would defend the Christians against the Muslims. And that's why these groups were claiming each they were different things, not understanding who the hell these guys were. So it's interesting. But yeah, that was
a question.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Do Gnostics view Christ
view
all daily? Yes, some would, for sure. Some would see what's it called? God as a solar system itself. Some would see Christ as being one with God as well, so being that same sort of image. We also had some believing that Christ was Saturn, or even the archons themselves were planets. Again, diverse beliefs. So I could say yes and I can say no. So, you know, which is the fun fact about Gnostics.
Now the archons being like the planets.
Yeah.
What we've heard recently from Micah Dank, he does astrotheology, and he's an ex-Mason, and he also does gematria and whatnot. He said that now the archons would be the new, or not the archons, but the aeons would represent like the new age. Like this is, the age of Aquarius, as opposed to age of Pisces. So it is the aeon of Aquarius, per se.
Yeah. Well, some even believe, planets were aeons too. The belief of planets being archon would be in challenge to the Greco-Roman religions being their gods and to escape this material existence and ascending beyond them. Others didn't view the archons as bad either, some viewing as a mixture. So you had, say, the Cephian Gnostics believing, say, Sabaoth, being a son of Yahweh, was one of the archons that rebelled against his father and honored Sophia, worshipped the true high God, was lifted up, granted his own heaven, his own chariots, and his own throne and angels, and ruled the seventh heaven. You had other Gnostics believing that Sabaoth was Yahweh. Others believing there were two Sabaoths, believing one was the son of the head archon Yahweh that rebelled, and others believing that there was an evil one, or just one that was a replication of Yahweh's many names, and then obviously the Sabaoth figure. So again, different beliefs in regarding that as well. So I also see that as another symbolic meaning of Christ as well, or the story of you rebelling against previous old religions and finding gnosis and being reborn, basically, as well. We had early Christians that believed that the Roman gods were demons, if you will, or evil spirits, I should say, not quite demons. This belief didn't come until later. The Essenes, of which, and some zealots hated Rome with a passion, were willing to kidnap and kill for their beliefs, wanting a Messiah to rebel. They believed that the Roman gods were evil spirits influencing this world. Some believing that Satan as well was a figure that was either good or bad. The Pharisees, for instance, believing that Satan was an angel that served Yahweh. He wasn't good or bad. He was just doing what he was told. So he never acted outside of Yahweh. You had other beliefs. Believe Satan existed was rather just a adversary. So you have a text that contradicts itself. You know, Yahweh even being a Satan, basically being an adversary against Israel. We had the Dead Sea Scrolls with the story of Abraham's sacrifice. We have one of the angels, I forgot his name now, being the ruler of the underworld, trying to incite basically Abraham to rebel against God, and he agrees still to sacrifice his son. This angel's plan fails, and Abraham is rewarded, and God punishes this angel instead. That's a total different story. So again, we have all these different sects in regarding everything. So it's hard to say, but that angel, I forgot the name, is mentioned in Gnostic Christianity alongside the archons. So we see early.
Is it Samael?
No.
It's Samael? No.
It's
okay.
Something different. I might have it written down somewhere, actually, on one of my notes somewhere, but who knows what that is? No idea what that is.
Archon archetype.
Well, Saturn would be an
I'm not
Archon
sure.
archetype. Saturn would be one.
Yeah.
I think he's also replicated by Saturn, though. So that's one of his archetypes, yes. I just forgotten this particular angel's name. But there's different accounts on this. There's two angels as well in some accounts. There's an angel that serves this angel that's also evil. Then there's this angel that's the ruler of the underworld. And these sort of angels also contributed into the Satan. You know, so, and fallen angels too. You had this belief too as well. I like the belief that Yahweh was a fallen angel. That's interesting with Simon Maker's belief, you know. And then you had the Margarites believing that he was a demiurge, but not evil. So rather a lieutenant.
Weird. That's why you have to stay flexible with everything, right? You need to stay flexible in your mind and in your heart, because nothing's set in stone. Even if it is set in stone, that it's a different time. That was then, this is now, right?
Well, and like how we are now, anyone can write a book and put it online.
Yeah. Anybody can be a cult leader. Anybody can say Jesus did this or that. All right. So Belias, is that Belias? Is that the
Hello?
I don't know, is that the are you Banshee, are you talking about the angel or the archon that we're trying to think of? Maybe that's what she's talking about. I'm not sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, though. We're going over an hour. I didn't know. I didn't know how long Nathan wanted to go, and I don't want to take up too much of his time. Also, I love to talk about it too. So if you're not in a hurry, then we can keep going. We could go.
Yeah.
Ruler of the underworld. Belias.
That's the one. I think it is Belias. That's one of them. There's two angels as well. I believe that's one of them. I think this one's spot on the money. I hate when I forget names. So even in person,
that's Banshee. She's also a fellow Australian. Yes. I love Australia.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's good to see more Australians coming into this side of history. It's not taught here. It's so unknown here. Like if I was in America, man, I could access so much information. Here's a bit harder because I have to go all online mostly, you know, and order stuff. You know, at least probably be able to access sellers over in America easier. So,
what part of Australia?
Cool. That's what I've been like before. I'm in South Australia, so I'm in Adelaide. So the bottom part. Yeah.
I lived
not the very, very
Australia
bottom.
In 2014 in Cairns.
It's pretty it's nice here. I like Queensland as well. That's up top. I've been there as well.
Yeah.
That's more muggy there. Lorraine as well. So it's nice there. It's beautiful. It's got more stuff there than here. Here is more like, we used to have a lot of stuff, but not as much. A lot of it got shut down. But to be fair, all that stuff was more for families. And that was good to see, you know. So we need more go-karts and stuff here, man. So that'd be cool.
More
I like
entertainment. Well, Australia's a beautiful country, though. You know, it's gorgeous. You know, I know you can't like go really in the middle. I mean, you can go there, but it's mostly everybody's on the coastlines, and you know. So I was in the very Gulf, the very top there when I first got. I was in Australia for 9 months, so I was up there at the very Gulf, all the way down to Sydney. So it was an interesting experience. I took a train ride through Australia. So
wonderful! That's cool. Might have been on the same train as me then. I've done the train ride as well. It was really cool. We went from I went from Adelaide basically to Melbourne. That was a good experience.
Yes, it was nice to do.
Did you get first class?
Oh yeah, she was telling me. She was telling me the other. She's like 2.5 hours one way to get to the grocery store, where she can buy appliances.
Oh, wow.
Like she needed an appliance, so yeah, she's in BFE.
She's right up in the country. Yeah, she's in the outback.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah,
that's
she's
cool.
way out there.
That's what I'm talking about.
Blessings. That's cool.
I know,
that had a full
that's
accent.
amazing.
My accent's like a mixture of like Irish and Aussie, I think. So I have other Aussies say that I see your accent, and it's funny. I think a lot of Aussies speak like a lot of Americans. That's just my opinion. But yeah.
Really depends on what part of the Americas you're talking about.
Yes, that's true as well. That's very true because some have a full like country dialect as well. You know?
Right. I'm from the South, so I've had to work on the accent over the years because you know.
Okay, I wouldn't have noticed. That's cool. So like your type of accent with both of you, that's the accent I like because I can easily understand it. I hope mine is too because mine probably a bit out there. So mixed blood.
Since I live there, I can hear it, you know, like Kiwis, they're hard to understand. New Zealanders, yeah, so they were hard for me to understand when I was there. But you know, I wasn't around them a lot, so. But yeah, it was a very interesting experience.
I have a few New Zealand friends, so I can understand some of them as well. Depends on, I think, what part as well. So.
Dante's Inferno.
Yeah. So slight different tongue,
so
like sounding.
The divine feminine, the rose. Let's talk about the rose.
Okay. Well.
Okay, Sean.
What's going on, girl? What you got going on over there?
I'm stoned. Dante's the ruler. Dante's Inferno. Everybody was kung fu fighting.
But in regard to the underworld place, that's pretty interesting as well because we have Sheol. In this replication, it seems to be a mixture of Sheol and Hades. So it's pretty interesting when you look at that. But I don't see that just as a Greek adaptation because if we look at before the Israelites existed, the Greeks were borrowing from the Canaanites. So the depiction of El with a big long beard, that's depicted, well, El I just said. Yeah, I was meant to say the picture of Zeus with a big long beard was taken from El. So El was the original long, wise one. So
okay. Do you think El was an alien or just a greater man in a sense? You know what I mean?
El Elyon, like the god?
Yes.
I think honestly, daily basically that's mythologized into a name. I see El Elyon as a title, so I think a lot of some of these old cults that were for no image of God were going into the tradition of not having a name. This idea of God being beyond everything we know, so an unknowable God, so Gnosticism is in a sense, so something that's beyond human comprehension, and variants of names of having titles of thoughts of what God is. But in regards to that, the first God, and this is important, what we see, the first gods in depiction of Mother Earth was of a feminine nature, and sometimes of both masculine and feminine. So androgynous. So it was either so just female or both male and female. Then later male came. So we have the lion sculpture, for instance, the Lion Man, which is made out of mammoth ivory. That's not quite a god yet. That's a spirit guide. So that's someone that's guiding you. So taking the form of an animal and humans or spirit. That would later turn into the belief of gods. And from that, you have the belief of half animal, half human gods. You see this in ancient Egypt, in the Sumerian deities. Yep. So this is replicated from our earlier traditions of spirit guides. So we have some of the earliest beliefs would also be ancestor worship, believing our ancestors are spirits that in turn also gods that guide us as well. We have this belief in the Druids. We also find this belief in some ancient African religions, and even in some modern African tribes that have survived today have this belief of their ancestors being the gods, being the spirits that guide us. And also part of the elements, wind, fire, winter and summer and all that sort of stuff, But yeah, Mother Earth was first depicted so as a pregnant woman. So they would have seen life and death and rebirth together, seeing death and life. So this would have formed into the basis of religion. Neanderthals believed in reincarnation. So that's interesting. Early man believing in reincarnation, meaning this is the earliest belief. So I see this as replication of the earth being worshipped as the source of life, and also the sun and the moon. This is why you also see the combination of masculine and femme. The first plants cultivated was cannabis. What does cannabis become? Either male or female or hermaphrodite. So replicated in their religion. So this is what led up to the civilization of religion that comes a part of civilization. So I would see that as an adaptation of this. I would see the first god being replicated as the system of being in pairs and offices, masculine and feminine itself, energy itself. That's what I see basically God as. And I see this as a tradition of somewhat being that, not so much as advanced as what I'm describing it, but more primitive, So they would have seen that as unknowable, Who the hell do I know? I can't even know. So it's even beyond my own comprehension of explaining but that's what I see it as coming as. I see the first gods being depicted as both masculine and feminine or as woman. So what came first? I don't know. Probably women. So that meaning that the religions first started because of women. So bringing religion to this world, which is also interesting because it's because of women. We have creation, we have birth. Why not the idea of women giving birth to religion? What's so scary about that? I think that's beautiful.
And then you have them as seers and oracles,
Yep, and now also women as well. You see a lot of the cases being in caves in a private place to be in alone with God, or their God, or gods,
Exactly.
or even spirits. Big part to play with
dark,
this. And
the deep, the dark, the underworld.
Yep, 100%. 100%.
Is the feminine, right?
Yeah. And even with the idea of the underworld within the Jewish culture, Sheol, we had the belief that not all believed Sheol existed either. The Jews that did believe that souls would await there until the final days of God's judgment, to which the soul would join heaven, be a part of the divine council, the angels and God, would be angels themselves, or they would be punished and be destroyed if they weren't accepted and they lived a bad life and didn't worship God or loved and served him, blah, blah, blah. So that was the resurrection of the dead, which also some Christians believe that when the resurrection of the dead happened, Paul being one of these believers, believing that Jesus would resurrect at the time of the resurrection of the dead alongside everyone else, would just be the first to be resurrected, which is very interesting as well. So you had the word Gehenna, which Christians come up with hell. So the Jews didn't believe in hell. So either they made it up or they just don't understand where it come from. And this is the problem. So it's been mistranslated. Gehenna was a valley, which you can go today, you can travel there, just outside Jerusalem, just outside the walls. The Canaanites were said to practice child sacrifice there. They would sacrifice to Baal, particular Molech Baal, meaning child sacrifice Baal. So it's a title, Baal. There are many different Baals. Baal just means Lord. So which Lord you talk about? So there were child sacrifice to a particular Baal in Carthage, for instance. Baal was a brother of Yahweh. Some Canaanites sacrificed their children here to Yahweh. Not just Baal. This is what Christians don't want to talk about. It's not just one God they sacrifice It's
They
multiple
always
different
blame it on
gods.
the pagans. They're the only ones that do that.
Blame on the pagans. You know, don't talk about the Yahwist cult's crimes, which are arguably probably even worse. So some sacrifice to El. Love and share his orchard. I just realised who's on. He's a top bloke. Many blessings to you, brother. He's
Bloke, you say, yes, he is. He is a doll baby.
Awesome. So yeah, some
He's
scholars do
precious.
agree that, and yeah, there were different personifications of El. So you had, say, what are they called? Type of Canaanite tribe. The Greeks named them. As if I forgot that. That's terrible. I forgot this name. It's a Canaanite tribe. Oh, well, either way, I'll come back to that one. Phoenicians. So the word Phoeniki was a reference to the tribe.
Yes.
So they tribe that they make for the royal blue and royal purple. Some of them believed that El was Saturn, and they would sacrifice some children to El as well. So different beliefs on regarding this. So Gehenna, long story short, not just sacrificing was going on here. It wasn't just an evil place. No, it was also had some good. You had some Greeks that cremated their dead there. You had some Hellenistic Jews, being Greek-influenced Jews, Greek-speaking Jews, different types of Jews again, would cremate their dead there. Some buried their dead there because there were Jews that rejected cremation, that believed in the burial because of the resurrection of the dead. So they buried their Jewish people there. So there were Canaanites that also buried their dead there too, not just a place of sacrificing. Now, we have found these burial tombs showing that people there buried their dead there with high honor, with love, compassion. So we just have a pure Canaanite propaganda text in the case of the Bible. So this land Gehenna was also used by the Romans to cremate their dead there. They buried their dead there too, but at a separate part, they also burnt rubbish there and burnt the dead bodies of crucified victims. The fires never went out. So this is what Jesus is speaking of, the fires that don't get put out. So it was scary back then to have your body destroyed and you weren't able to have God resurrect the body to be a part of the resurrection of the dead, believing that you return in the body. But you have early Christian belief that saying, no, it's not the body that resurrects, it's the soul, it's the spirit, so rejecting the body. And you had some that didn't believe so much the case of the resurrection of the dead, but rather the soul just automatically go to heaven. But now the soul going to heaven automatically was regarded as heresy. That's a Gnostic belief. So the soul escaping this material plane without a sense of judgment, Gnostic. So this is something that other people don't take into account. And the Phoenicians as well, by the way, just a term that was given to them. They were Canaanites. So that's a Greek word. So, yeah.
Okay, I want to get over here to the comments real quick. Weren't Christians originally called Christians?
Christanos. Or Christanos.
Christanos, okay.
Yeah, is what they were called. So that means little anointed ones. And easy or good is another one. They did call themselves good Christians or poor ones as well. So there was different titles they preferred to call themselves. But yeah, you had the poor ones as well. You had the good ones, good Christians. You had little anointed ones. So it's like when you had the Gnostics. They didn't call themselves Gnostics. They called themselves Christians. There were some later that did use the term. They called themselves Gnostics. You had Catholics that liked some Gnostics and hated others, calling other ones fake ones and other ones real Gnostics, which is sort of funny.
Oh gosh, it's just oh my god, it's like high school stuff. And Clary, Tacitus referred to the Christus casting rebellion.
Well, there's some Christians that did rebel. There was I forgot this Roman's name, but he was one of the procurators, I think, or senators, or he was a government official. Either way, just in charge of a particular part of land. So all these Christians are demanded to be martyred, and they want to be killed to return to their God, to return to heaven. He turns around and after he gets a few people to just try to disband the mob, kills a few of them or beats a few of them up, then states, "You miserable creatures, go to the rivers and do it yourself." So he just goes back inside. He didn't want to deal with them, and the Christians were basically embarrassed and dispersed, which is a pretty funny case. That's strange. So there were Christians writing against this, stating that it's a sin to get yourself martyred on purpose because they didn't want you just dying. So this was something that why Christians would survive, because they were willing to die for their religion, they were willing to die for their faith as well. So, yeah. Shara's made a comment.
Too?
Yeah. That's cool. With the agreeing of being absorbed into Hellenistic ideas of the underworld having a place of suffering, yeah, it's very possibly so. But it could also be, say, Zoroastrian influence too, maybe, possibly, who bloody knows? Or even maybe a previous Canaanite belief that we're not really, well, we're unsure of, because there were different Canaanite practices and beliefs. Most talk about, because they're ignorance, believe that the Canaanites were a group of gay people eating shellfish. No, like, this is not the bloody case. Some Canaanites were vegetarians, practicing chastity, not having sex, very similar to Essenes. In fact, some Essenes could be arguably Canaanites, from Canaanite ancestry, Canaanite influence, Canaanites themselves that converted into Judaism, blah, blah. The Dead Sea Scroll community were definitely, some were Canaanite influenced, because they had the belief of Yahweh and El worshipping alongside each other, being Yahweh being the son of El Elyon. This is a part of the Canaanite pantheon. So not all had this belief. Some were only worshipping. Yeah.
It's ancestral worship in cults, and the name of the ancestor, I believe, this is just my opinion, became the name of the tradition. Like Clary says here, Jupiter is Zedek in Phoenician as in Melchizedek and Adonizedek. I was initiated under a Melchizedek tradition. I have not heard of Adonizedek. However, that is
also there's a god in the Canaanite pantheon called Adon, and then you also have the Greeks Adonis as well. So, and that could also be where the word Adonai comes from.
Nothing is ever one thing, which is why it's important we study history. Yes, it is. And get multiple opinions. Don't say, I heard it, I believe it. Don't stay stuck in that rut, y'all. I'll challenge you every time. Be fluid and open. Have flexibility
there's never one way.
with it. A lot of early Jerusalemite priests and kings were named in reference to traditions. It's the fucking Princess Bride situation.
Also some were named after Yahweh as well, and El, and Baal. Hannibal, who almost took out Rome, his name is named after Baal. So he worshipped a part of the Canaanite gods as well. So, and there were some believing that El was Jupiter, some even believing that it was Saturn, different beliefs. Some sacrificed to El, some did not believe this. There were some Canaanites that did not want to worship El because he was too loving. And it's like, we can't go to war. We want to go to war and steal these people's shit. El doesn't like us doing this, but Yahweh does. But not all had this belief of Yahweh either. Some believing Yahweh was just loving. Others believing that he was, barbaric. But Yahweh really started off as a warrior cult. So El being the more merciful one. I'm much for El being the loving God. We even have a case El getting, in one Canaanite, I think it's in the Ugaritic text, El getting too drunk and the Elohim had to carry him back home. So the Elohim being referenced here to be the sons and daughters of El. So El and Asherah also being the father and mother of 80 to 70 different gods. So, just cool.
It's really the same gods, right? I mean, if we're talking about the planets, it's really the same gods.
Yeah, basically, all just different adaptations, different names, and that sort of stuff. You also had some believing that basically it was one god doing all this stuff and just appearing to all these different people in different forms. And it was like, oh, this is my god, but really it's all just one god. We had different beliefs. Hard to say, we also had Jews that acknowledged the belief that there were other gods, but they only worship one god. So
it's just, what all this reminds me of? I'm sorry, I'm a mother. This is just kind of where my mind went. Is just all the kids fighting over like the G.I. Joe toys. Which G.I. Joe is the best? Which Barbie is the best Barbie? You know what I mean?
We have canon, non-canon, fan-made. People arguing over which is canon. My Superman is best. I don't like Superman. I like Dragon Ball Z. I don't mind Superman. I'm not a huge fan. I think he's kind of boring. White bread. I guess another term you could use. And here we go.
Adon. Ariel, Adon. What is the history of Adon? Who is Adon?
Adon was one of the Canaanite gods as well,
Adonai.
and some see him as Adonis as well. I think they're kind of different, but I also see different representations of Adon as well. So it's like when you go to the Sumerian, there's different versions of Anu and Anuki, and was another god as well. And sometimes he was either as being head of the god or not head and the lesser god. So you have all these adaptations being contributed. And I think even when we look at Yahweh, we don't really know where this god actually came from. He either came from the Canaanites or possibly from the Arabs. You know, it's just the first mention we have were of this Canaanite tribe in Egypt, you know. But some of these Canaanite kings were named after El, were named after Yahweh as well, you know, and even after Egyptian gods as well, when you go into the Hyksos that were ruling Egypt. So it's crazy, you know. I see that whole story of Exodus being a mix of later and earlier events of the Hyksos, Shashu, probably a little bit of Akhenaten, possibly even a bit of Phoenicians or whatever in the mix of it all. It's hard to say. No one really knows. It's all just scholarly opinions that we can just go back and forth on, really. You know, so that's all I'm going to be able to do is I can give you my opinions, or I can give you what scholars think, and that's all I can really do. I won't ever tell someone what to fully believe, because it's up to them what they're going to have to make up their mind, because really we know nothing.
Right. It's all about the heart for me.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm
Heart
going to
mind.
show you
Social mind's
all
a good-
Clary asked about Malachi 4:2. Can you see what
Yeah,
it
bring it up.
says if you're familiar with it? But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, Son of Righteousness, shall rise with healing in its wings.
Cool.
You shall
Well, that
go
screams-
out leaping like calves from the stall. So
'Cause we
I
have
think
the
what that's
Son of Righteousness.
referring to is
You heard that term before?
you
With the
know,
Essene
the
text?
winged disc, the wing. That's in Malachi. That's in the ESV Bible, English Standard Version Bible.
Yeah, that screams Essene to me,
And
because they called their messiahs sons of righteousness. So
okay.
that's my
Okay.
theory on that. I see that as
Thank you,
being influenced.
BNT. Everybody, go follow Nathan. He's amazing. He's brilliant.
Yeah,
And he
I wasn't
is a
expecting it
sexy priest.
to
So
be so good.
how often do you get to learn from sexy priests with sexy accents?
Well, you know, I've been into all this information for a long time. So to hear someone go into detail and just roll it out with it, it's really nice. You know, it's like and a lot of it is new, and it puts it together in a way where it's easy to follow. So it's been really lovely.
Yeah, yep. So I think what's going on is they just turned the worship of the sun into the worship of because like we have proof that the sun is it gives us life. It is the source of all life on this planet, right? Yeah. So I think sun worship just turned into, it was like idol worship.
Yeah, I could be spot on. Also, possibly a little bit of Akhenaten, because his belief of the god Aten, the sun disk god, was both male and female, him being the sun. So it could also be a replication of that.
Right. Even in the statues, he's kind of has a feminine shape to him.
Yeah, both masculine and femme. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's very likely even possibly from that. But the thing is, Akhenaten was gone for the records and gone for earlier aspects. So he didn't come up with this idea of Aten. Aten already existed and was the aspect of Ra.
Right.
They believe that the morning sun, he'd come on the cloud and live on a cloud. When the sun rises, they would see the cloud, and as the sun set, it would be clouds, and that's where you get your winged solar disc in Egyptian symbology.
And even the morning star was demonized and also, holified at the same time as well in regards to Jesus. And Lucifer, which didn't appear until the Latin Vulgate or whatever. So that term was non-existent. It's a confusion from, I forgot exactly what text in the Old Testament, might be in Isaiah, and it's a reference to a Babylonian king that falls from God's grace. And so that's what it's actually about, a king that rules Babylonia. And this king was overthrown by Cyrus the Great, who was recognized as a Messiah of the Jewish people, which is pretty interesting as well, having God's favor. Following Yahweh, some Jews rejected him as a Messiah, did not believe so. So him rebuilding the temple tradition, he's purposely trying to be enacting a Messiah, being worshipped by these other people within his empire. So he's got a following, he's got support, he's got authority, he's recognized, ruling over not just his own people, but foreign people that are now willing to fight and die for him as their Messiah, which is interesting. Regarding the word Messiah, it could be anyone who helped the Jewish people. It can be a king who is warlike, converting the whole world to Judaism, or who has liberated the Jewish people. So we had different versions and beliefs of what the Messiah was, and not all Jewish people believed in the Messiah. Some believed that anyone claiming to be a Messiah was a troublemaker, was possibly even an agent against God. And yeah, I do. It's spiritual level of being for the person asked about my channel. But
we just pinned it. Thanks, Banshee.
Forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, in regards to Yahweh, and even say the Torah, with what Asherah's Orchard mentioned, each channel anyone that watches this too is wonderful. Fluent speaking Hebrew. And God, I lost track of my sense. I'm doing this, I'm on the roll today. Lovely. I'm going to get some dice and roll. Mess up. Named after Yahweh and El. So these were meant to be against Torah traditions to even have your depiction as well on a coin, or even God's depiction on a coin. But before, in these ancient times, this was happening. This is before the Torah was actually constructed. So it was passed on orally. We had a lot of stuff first, then being turned into written stuff. But again, before any of these written accounts, we had oral, and those oral traditions were made up of many different oral traditions, and that reflects the different editions of the text. Why you have, say, different versions of the first 5 books of Moses, and why some accepted other traditions and others. Sadducees accepted only first 5 books. Everything else to them was rejected, was man-made, not inspired by God at all, and was basically a crime, was wrong. The Pharisees, however, accepted more books, and then you had the Essenes, different communities, having a more extensive law, others accepting other texts and some rejecting others. So you had some Essenes that practiced sacrificing, others that were totally against all forms of sacrificing, that were vegetarians, some that were pescatarian, believing that fish, and this is the same belief in the Cathar, that fish split in half and they were basically God's bread in the ocean given by God, and they didn't have sex, thus they didn't have a soul in them, and it was okay to eat them. So they didn't know how they bred back then, so it was interesting. So this even went on for a long time with eels, believing that eels simply split in half before we figured out that they would breed. So not believing that fish was truly meat. So in that replication, some believing that they were still vegetarian, we'll call that pescatarian still though. Others that did eat meat, others that rejected sacrificing, but would still eat meat and buy it from the market and send something to the temple. Again, different beliefs. We can't say anything. Yeah, and there's also higher beliefs about fish as well, 100%. So we find fish replicated in a lot of ancient religions as well, not just Christianity and Judaism as well. Also we find within Sumerian cults, we have fish gods or whatever. So it's pretty cool. Or replicated by the ocean.
Lots of fish gods, traveler gods.
Even the sea sponge was seen as sacred. Yeah, which is really cool. 100%. And people traveled, There were even gods in, say, the Roman bathhouses and their toilets, because it was scary and you took a risk of dying going to those public bathrooms sometimes, so they had gods there. So pray to the gods every time you take a poo that you don't catch something. So that's pretty hardcore.
Super paranoid. They seem super paranoid to me.
Yeah. People died early back then. It's like people died from food poisoning, but people survived from it too. Not everyone died, So it was quite common back then. Even with mushrooms, people weren't 100% sure what they were picking. People died sometimes from mushrooms. You took a risk of buying it from the market because not everyone knew what they were doing.
And if they were doing the mystery rites using like excrement of bodies, that's probably not very healthy either, like blood and all this stuff, So
Ariel, what does that mean? Asher Yazar? Asher
Into the
Yazar?
loop. That's a
What does
god,
that
a
mean?
Tulip god, a tulip god.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's trippy. I know there's a couple of scenes about in the toilet in the Torah as well, in regarding to how to bury your poo. Basically, one of the things I think it might be in forgot what part.
How
There's
to
also a part in
bury
Ezekiel. Well,
the prayer
yeah, that's
for your
cool, beautiful.
body
A
work.
prayer for your body working properly as well.
Okay.
That was carried on in any ancient past as well. That was important back then. Even find Christian magical spells that were used to help your body function properly and to heal
Right.
constipation. You know, so and that was done with a prayer along with the drink that the person would drink. I have a Christian spell on me here. Like, it's just a replica though. Where do I find it? And this was used. I think it's the London Oxyrconus Papyrus. I forgot what number. But this one here was used to cast out evil spirits and demons. And this was from the 4th century, written in Coptic.
Hold on a
So it's a
minute.
Coptic-
Wait. Let me get you front and center. Wait. Okay, now what is
There
this?
you go, yeah.
That's a Christian spell made to cast out demons and evil spirits. So it's an
Nice.
exorcism spell. And it's followed by a
Nice.
Christian prayer as well, and a picture of Jesus and
witchcraft going on.
the crucified
Hey,
rebels.
can you send
or
me
thieves.
that in English? And like, can you?
I can
could you
find
send-
it. I can send you a museum article and they'll have it in English for you because I can't read Coptic at all. I can read a piece or two of Greek, but not much, you know. I used to
Okay.
translate a few Greek stuff, which is fantastic to use. I also like to use Bill Mount, so I always look at alternative translations. So I use encyclopedias as well to go alongside to help me with that too. So I know some basic.
Okay.
It's like even. Well, I have a couple of things. I have here Gospel
We have
Mary.
a
Well, that's
question
that.
too. Hold on a
Gospel
minute.
Mary.
Wait, let me get you up here. Is that an original? Like you have an
No, these are
ancient
these are
original?
replicas. I wouldn't be able to
Okay, I
afford
was
an
like,
original.
what are you doing right now?
What are they made
Yeah,
of?
these are replicas. Egyptian papyrus. That's real Egyptian paper, real Egyptian papyrus.
Oh
I
wow,
have
that's
some of
So I've
cool.
just made it.
Yeah.
And this is the
I
Coptic
have some
Gospel
blank.
Thomas.
I have some blank papyrus. I'm saving it for super spell.
That's
then
really
the Gospel of John.
spiffy.
So that's the
Mhm.
oldest copy of the Gospel of John we have. That's the 2nd century, basically. It's not real. This is replica again.
Right.
So everything we have of the Christians is 2nd century. The only thing that we have that possibly, maybe, dates to the 1st century is Gnostic, which is interesting. But again, we don't have any of these original texts either. So that's troublesome as well. So what did the first original say? We don't really know, you know, which is a thing. The whole New Testament was written in Greek. We possibly had some Syriac ones floating around, you know, possibly one or two floating around in Hebrew too, but first one's written in Greek. The Torah, though, Aramaic and Hebrew. Possibly parts of maybe bits and pieces in Greek, but definitely Aramaic and Hebrew for the originals, you know. But complete-wise, first compiled in Greek, you know, because they were arguing. So
There we
That was cool.
go. Look, that's better. Look. Okay, so who was Didymus Judas Thomas, twin brother of Jesus?
we got
Do
a
you
couple
know?
of answers for this one. So good. I'll give you the symbolic one first. The symbolic one is when you enact the role of Jesus, you become like Jesus. So when you do what he does, you yourself become the twin of Jesus, his divine double. So you achieve your own divine double. You achieve the inner Christ when you yourself, you become like Christ, you are Christ. That's what it basically means. He's meant to be Jude,
Mhm.
so the brother of Jesus, which is in some traditions recorded as being his twin, or looks like Jesus, or who acted like Jesus that they called him his twin. Again, symbolism, replicating that you become like Jesus yourself. So it could also be Thomas the Doubter, who apparently could have looked like Jesus and called him his twin, or was just a twin of someone else and was called Thomas the Twin. And then this whole twin brother was an Eastern Christian tradition within, you know, the Middle East. So it comes from there. So that's an early tradition. So it's Jude. It's Thomas, Jude, basically. It's not the Thomas the Doubter. This whole place of Thomas the Doubter was placed in the way that this text, basically. It was pushed in a way into it. But yeah, it's Jude. And if you look at Jude and we look at James, the two brothers of Jesus, in some traditions, James is the older brother of Jesus. They're not cousins like this Catholic shit. So we had the Ebionites, for instance. They believed that Jesus was the biological son of Joseph and that his brothers were Jude and James, and his sisters were either Mary or Martha or whatever, like different things, or just unnamed, different groups, different beliefs. So in that replication of you becoming Christ, so it's you become the divine double. So Jude and James as well, they had children. Now this is interesting. People don't talk about this, but we had writings from Eusebius and other Christian church fathers bitching about the family of Jesus' brothers, their kids, not being the same version of Christianity as them. They were Jewish Christians, likely having Gnostic beliefs as well. So this was a problem to the church, and they were complaining about them in the 3rd and 4th century. We don't hear any talk about that, but their cousins, no. Like these are nephews of Jesus, and they were leading the Jewish movement, the Jewish Christian movement in Jerusalem, and then later on the so-called not Temple of Jerusalem. That's the wrong word. The early Christian movement. It's a certain fucking word I'm looking for. It's like a Temple of Rome, what they use as well. Either way, so this movement got usurped and changed into Rome by a person called the Bishop of Rome. Was a bishop of Jerusalem at first. So these bishops of Jerusalem, early Jerusalem, got hijacked by a Latin guy called Marcus, who becomes the first one and then moves the organization to Rome. So the early church was located in Jerusalem. Who the hell is this Marcus guy that speaks Latin, who's basically a Gentile, whatever, that takes the practice away from the family members of Jesus after they apparently die out? So these family members were persecuted later as well by the family, or by the Roman Church, and before that by the Romans. So I believe it was even Hadrian had some persecuted as well. Might not have been Hadrian, have to look at the emperor's name. But they are recorded in history as being the sons of Jude and James, leading an early Christian movement, but a different version of Christianity. They're not Orthodox. So you find writings of Eusebius and a couple of other Christian guys. I actually made a video on mine. I think it's under the bloodline of Jesus. I've done, I think, 2, and I think of Jude. So I go on into the actual ancestry that's mentioned. So we actually have recording names of these people. Their names are recorded, which is cool. There's a couple of them. James' family seems to die out. Male ones. They don't name the female ones. They're only naming the male ones. This is the church.
Well, but
they don't
we
want you to
know,
know
yeah, we know
so
they trace the lineage through
that family's still alive then. Yeah. But yeah, because we don't have that, we only have the men descendants being recorded. We don't know of the females. So that meaning that the family of Jesus is still out there probably. Probably. It's a good possibility because no females are mentioned in the recordings of the names. They weren't deemed important enough because at that time, the ones who were bitching about them were only recognizing men. So, dicks.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming up on the 2 hour. We've got some questions, so let's try to get through those. Clary says Christ was rectified on the place on the skull. Is this a chakra experience? Like, are you talking like crown chakra, third eye, pineal gland, maybe? Oh, okay, on the basilica. I don't know what you're asking about with the basilica.
Chakra's a part of the tradition, not so much Jewish. Chakra's more like Hindu.
Okay.
So they would be more like Kabbalah in the sense of they'll be forming into it, in that sort of time. But that would be more just their oral traditions. So that would be belonging to the mystics, So the mystics had a different sort of interpretation to, say, dogmatic ones that were more control this.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of the mystic line than the dogmatic.
Not all the Ebionites, by the way. So this person said they're Jesus' nephews. The ones that were leading these movements were the nephews of Jesus. But to be fair, the Ebionites claimed to be the descendants of those who were led by James, the just, Jesus' brother. And after James died, the group had infighting and split, and you had the Nazarenes and Ebionites. So these groups were led by the brothers of Jesus. Jesus having brothers being Jude and James, but not just by them. Mary Magdalene had a part to play too. You know, it's argued to say that the Kaffar were descendant of those that were taught by Mary Magdalene. Argument, don't know.
On
yeah.
the place of the skull. Are you talking about Golgotha? Everything before Constantine created his composite Christ is Gnostic. Golgotha, yeah. Yeah, Golgotha.
And even Constantine was somewhat sympathetic towards the Gnostics. He didn't want them killed. He was okay with someone being exiled, though, because they caused trouble within his reunification of the empire. He wanted the ones that were loyal to Rome, not ones who claimed that his politician officials or those who worked under him were archons, and that he himself was under the influence of the Anabaoth or the archons. That's troublesome for him. He couldn't have that. Also, the act of running through brothels and freeing slaves was problematic to Constantine too. So he sympathized with them. So as I said, he didn't have them killed. So that's one bonus point for Constantine. He did still have some some exiled, wrong word. Now, regarding Constantine, he wasn't a true Christian. He had his own beliefs. He was a part of the Mithra cult. He was a part of the Helios cult as well, a sun god. He also worshipped Apollo. He worshipped many gods. So the Mithra cult was a warrior cult as well. So he was a warrior as well. He was a general. So he had a mixing of that. Even the Council of Constantine that he organized, the Council of Nicaea, there were pagans there, if you will want to use that word, present there at that meeting as well, not just Christians. It was an organization. So it was a reunification. Another word would be, what's a word? Not reading. I've very used reunification. Forgotten a word. Forgotten this word. It's basically saying when something new comes into play. Reformation of a religion, basically, was what Constantine was basically doing. So a system of elites that can be in alignment to each other and have opposite beliefs but work together, basically. So something loyal to his system. But there wasn't just one council, there was 11. So that took place centuries after the first one. And Christians arguing over their ideas of canon. You had St. Nicholas there, this council as well, who punched one of the other Christians in the face, who was an Arian Christian. So, because he didn't like the idea that one Christian said that Jesus...
Wait, back up. Arian Christian, what is that?
Arian Christians, there are Christians that believe that Jesus was a spirit, basically, adopted by God. So, not quite human in the sense, so beyond it, so not being defiled by sin. So, Jesus so divine he didn't take a poo, sort of belief, which was common as well amongst some Catholics. Valentinus believed this too. He believed Jesus was so divine he didn't take a poo. Marcion as well.
Is it like a purist type, like mindset?
Yeah, basically
like
purity. It was so pure that everything that Jesus would eat would automatically be dissolved and purified, though he had no need for bodily movements, which Christians did argue over. Saint Nicholas did not like that belief, believing that Jesus was, human but divine. So everything about him in flesh was flesh, basically. And so he punched another Christian in the face because of that belief. And he got kicked out of that meeting. And then later on, they were sort of thinking, what's it called? I forgot this dude's name. Arius, the dude who made this movement of Christianity, wrote to the Pope as well, I'm going to mention this, complaining about the United Trinity, saying, you don't believe these beliefs, do you? They're Gnostic. They're Valentinian beliefs. Not realizing that this United Trinity was from the Carpocratians. So they're the first to come up with the idea of God being one, of being Christ. That's taken from Simon Magus in a sense of the belief of the Logos being Christ. So, however, Simon Magus believed originally the Logos was Moses and was replaced by Christ, who did even greater things. And I think that was passed on by the disciples, that he was taught that tradition because he was a student of Philip. And if you're a student, you're learning from your master. So that implies he's learning something from these Christians that taught him, and why he was condemned as worse than Satan. But funny enough, it's not just because of what he did that had the church condemning him. It's because the traditions of the Catholic traditions, such as the Eucharist and the fancy gold, all this sort of stuff, comes from Simon Magus. He was enacting these mystery traditions for the followers. So he was bringing the mysteries to the people to bring them into the unification of the divine femme masculine, to make them Christ-like for themselves, to deify them, believing himself was deified, meaning not what people think. To him, deified meaning to be in complete control of yourself, to know thyself, be in control of mind, body, and spirit. So be control of your actions.
Exactly. Right.
That's and that's fucking hard. That is hard to control.
Yeah,
everything you do.
it is. Especially for men. I mean, no diss on men, but I understand that it is a constant desire in which you have to, you're all the time, you either try to, gain control over it, which is why the Masons wear the apron when you get, so far into it, or you just become as wild beast. So yeah, it's amazing.
Image of God or image of an animal?
Huh? Oh, right. It's like, which one? And it's like, you're constantly going between, the two. And it makes sense and that's the way the energy flows too, right? It's very serpentine, and it goes back and forth, on and off, good and bad, black and white, push, pull, ebb and flow. It's beautiful. Let's wrap it up at that. And then Clary says, look at the sun behind the head of Jesus on the wall right there. Yeah, it is the sun.
There's some Buddhist ones there too.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Paul in the epistle. But even that sun is replicated to the sun cross too, so which is pretty cool.
All right, any final thoughts as we wrap it up?
I'll be fine on my end unless there's something.
You want to plug yourself where they can find you?
Yeah, so we've dropped your link in the chat a bit.
Wonderful. Yeah, they can find me on YouTube, Spiritual Level of Being, Facebook as well. I've got Spiritual Level of Being there as well. And then there's the Gnostic Catholic Union. Sorry, used to be. That's changed now because I took charge of the organization. I threw out the Catholic name. They're all happy I did that too. The Gnostic Union, it's called now. That's on Facebook and it's also on YouTube, but that's just starting. There's also Gnosis Within. I've got a few groups and I'm with a few different groups too. So they can find me, I'm sure. I'm sure, but I'll be here again.
Awesome. So. Awesome. Well, we appreciate you hanging out with us. Let's get you out of solo. You should come and hang out with us again. Maybe we can have some cannabis gnosis streams. That would be amazing. Wouldn't it? All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging. Yeah, wouldn't it be fun? Everybody come get stoned and talk some gnosis.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's legal. If you're of age, this is not I'm not saying I'm not doing that. Okay. Where it's legal, if it applies. All right. I'm getting off of here before I get in trouble. Okay. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.